When I called to ask Max about his wedding date, Lena looked straight at me and, with a cold smile, said, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." The words landed like a shock. Special people. Me, who for 3 years had paid their $500 monthly rent, bought every piece of furniture in their home, and filled their fridge when they had nothing. I was not special. I stood in my own living room holding the phone as if it were unbearably heavy, watching my son avoid my eyes while Lena settled onto the sofa I'd bought them. The pale pink dress I'd chosen for her wedding hung unused in my closet, along with the new shoes and the hope of being included in my only son's biggest day. I'd spent $200 on that dress, imagining how I would look in Max's wedding photos. Photos I was never in. For weeks I'd planned every detail. I'd set aside $1,000 as a wedding gift. I'd called my sister Diana in Chicago to share the news. I'd cleaned the house from top to bottom, expecting they might come celebrate with me after the ceremony. Then everything fell apart in a single sentence: only special people. Max finally looked up and said in a rehearsed tone, "Mom, it was an intimate thing, very small, just the two of us and the witnesses." But I knew he was lying. I had seen the photos on social media. Lena's parents standing proudly beside the bride and groom, her siblings toasting with champagne, and Lena in the white dress I had helped fund with the $800 I'd given her last month. I saw what I wasn't supposed to see. A week later, 7 days after that humiliation, Lena called again, her voice entirely changed. No longer confident and excluding, now pleading. "Renate, the rent is overdue. The landlord is pressuring us and says if we don't pay this week, he'll evict us. You forgot to make the transfer." Her voice trembled as if everything was collapsing. I fell silent for a few seconds, remembering all the times I'd rushed to the bank to make that transfer. The times I'd canceled my own plans so they'd have a roof. The times I'd eaten simple meals so I could give them money. And now, after being excluded from their wedding, they called me as if nothing had happened. "Lena," I replied, with a calm that surprised me, "didn't I tell you I only help special people?" The silence on the line was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. For the first time in years, it was not me who trembled. "Renate, I don't understand," she stammered. "We were always special to you. You're like a second mom to me." Lies. Those words were wrapped in the same soft voice she used when she needed something. The voice that had asked me for money for the dress, the honeymoon, the rings, all of which I had helped pay for without knowing I would be excluded from the ceremony. For years, I'd lived like I was on eggshells, measuring every word, every gesture, every gift, hoping for a bit of affection from my son. I was the obliging mother, the silent provider, the invisible presence who never complained. But only special people woke something in me that had been dormant far too long. I did the math on what I'd spent over those 3 years. Between rent, food, gifts, emergencies, and little whims, it amounted to more than $20,000, money taken from my retirement, from savings, from what my late husband had left so I could live my later years in peace. And all that for what? To be treated like a stranger on my son's wedding day. That night, after I hung up, I sat on my bed and cried. Not from sadness, but from anger and accumulated frustration, from years of quiet humiliation. I cried for the times they made me feel my love was a burden, my presence unwanted, my money the only thing I had to give. I cried for the mother I had been, foolish, lost, trying to be indispensable to people who considered me dispensable. The next morning, something in me had changed. It wasn't only the pain of betrayal. It was a deeper, colder resolve. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, the same tired eyes, the same wrinkles of a life spent giving. But there was a hardness in my gaze I didn't recognize, a determination that had been buried under years of compliance. I made coffee as I always did, but this time I didn't think of calling Max or checking my phone for an apology. For the first time in a long while, I made myself the priority. I sat at the table where I had planned surprises, counted bills, and quietly cried when they ignored me. Now that table would witness something different. I opened my checkbook and bank statements and began to add up the exact cost of my help. Monthly rent of $500 for 36 months, $18,000. Food and household supplies, roughly $200 a month, about $7,200. Birthday, Christmas and anniversary gifts, at least $3,000. Lena's medical emergencies, $800, the car loan they never repaid, $2,500. Air conditioner repair at their apartment, $600. Living room furniture, $1,233,400. That was the total sum of my so-called generosity. $33,400 I had drained from my husband's inheritance, from my pension, from the savings I had built over decades of hard work. All that money wasted to keep two adults comfortable, two people who couldn't even offer me basic respect. When my phone rang and Max's name appeared, my heart didn't leap as it once would have. Normally, I would have rushed to answer, hoping for an apology, hoping it had all been a misunderstanding. But this time I let it ring, once, twice, 3 times until it stopped. I took another sip of coffee as if nothing had happened. 10 minutes later, it rang again. Lena this time. I ignored it too. Then came a text from Max. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk." I deleted it without replying. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I decided to take a walk. I hadn't done that in months, at least not for myself. My outings had always revolved around them. Trips to the bank to send transfers, to the supermarket to buy their groceries, to the pharmacy for Lena's medication. But today, I walked simply because I wanted to. I passed the park where I used to take Max as a boy. I could still see his little arms hugging me, hear him saying I was the best mom in the world. When had that affectionate child become a man who treated me like an ATM with feelings? When had I started confusing love with money, believing I had to buy my son's affection? When I reached the bank, I paused at the entrance. The branch manager, Mr. Klein, saw me through the glass and waved. I'd known him for years. He had processed every transfer to Max and Lena, watching my account slowly drain to fill theirs. I went straight to his office. "Mr. Klein," I said, "I need to cancel all the automatic transfers I've set up." He looked surprised. "For 3 years, those payments had been as regular as clockwork. Are you sure, Mrs. Richter? Did something happen?" His tone carried genuine concern, more genuine than anything my own son had shown me in months. "What happened," I replied evenly, "is that I've finally opened my eyes. I'd like to cancel everything and also learn how to secure my accounts. I don't want anyone else to have access to my money." While Mr. Klein processed the request, my phone kept ringing. Max, then Lena, then Max again. It was as if they could sense their financial lifeline was being cut off. I turned my phone off completely. "Mrs. Richter," Mr. Klein said, handing me the documents. "Forgive me if this is too personal, but over the years I've seen how generous you've been with your family. I just hope you're not being pressured into this." His kindness caught me off guard. This man, who only knew me through numbers and transfers, showed more compassion than my own child. "I'm not being pressured, Mr. Klein," I said quietly. For once, I've stopped pressuring myself. When I walked out of that office, I felt unexpectedly light, as though I'd left a great weight behind. For the first time in years, my money was truly mine. I no longer owed anything to people who saw me as a resource instead of a person. Back home, I thought about all the things I had sacrificed to keep Max and Lena happy, the trips I never took, the friends I'd drifted from, the hobbies I'd given up. Every dollar I spent on myself had always felt like one stolen from them. But when I turned the corner to my street, I froze. 3 cars were parked outside my house, Max's, Lena's, and a third I didn't recognize. Through the window, I saw movement inside. My stomach tightened. They had keys, of course they did. I had given them keys out of trust, thinking they would someday take care of me as I had cared for them. I took a deep breath and opened the door. It was time for the first real confrontation of my new life. Inside, the scene stunned me. Max sat on the sofa with his head in his hands. Lena paced the room nervously. An older man I didn't know stood at my dining table, sorting through my papers, my personal documents. What is going on here? I demanded, louder than I intended. They all turned, startled, as if I were the intruder in my own home. Lena spoke first, her voice trembling with forced urgency. Renate, thank God you're here. We need to talk. This is Mr. Fisher, from the law firm we consulted about your situation. My situation? I asked evenly. What situation? I'm perfectly fine. Max looked up, his eyes full of panic, financial panic. Mom, we went to the bank. They told us you canceled all the transfers. Mr. Klein said you also blocked our access to your accounts. We just don't understand why. Mr. Fisher, a man in his 50s with a gray suit and an insincere smile, stepped forward and extended his hand. Mrs. Richter, I'm Dr. Fisher, a family law attorney. Your children are concerned about your mental health and have asked me to assess the situation. I didn't take his hand. Instead, I walked straight to the table and gathered my papers. These are my private documents, I said firmly. You have no right to go through them without my consent. Mom, Max said, his tone patronizing, we're just worried about you. You've been acting strange, cutting us off financially, not answering our calls. We think you might need professional help. Lena approached me then, trying to take my hand. Her voice soft and artificial, the same voice she always used when she wanted something. When I called my son Max to ask about his wedding date, my daughter-in-law Lena looked me directly in the eye and, with a cold smile, said, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." The words hit me like a splash of ice water. Special people. I, who had paid their $500 rent every month for 3 years, bought every piece of furniture in their home, and stocked their fridge when they had nothing, apparently wasn't one of them. I stood there in my own living room, the phone suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in my hand, while my son avoided my eyes and Lena made herself comfortable on the sofa I had bought for them. The pale pink dress I had chosen for her wedding still hung in my closet, unworn, along with the new shoes and the illusion that I'd be part of my only son's most important day. I had spent $200 on that dress, imagining myself smiling in his wedding photos I would never appear in. For weeks, I had carefully planned everything. I had saved $1,000 to give them as a wedding gift. I'd called my sister Diana in Chicago to share the good news. I had cleaned my entire house, believing they might stop by to celebrate after the ceremony. All of that disappeared in a moment with those 4 words, only special people. Max finally looked up and said in a stiff, rehearsed voice, Mom, it was an intimate ceremony, just the 2 of us and the witnesses. But I knew it wasn't true. I had seen the photos on social media, Lena's parents standing proudly next to the couple, her siblings raising champagne glasses, and Lena in her white dress, the one partly paid for with the $800 I had given her last month. I saw everything I wasn't supposed to see. A week later, exactly 7 days after that humiliation, Lena called me again. Her confident tone was gone. Now she sounded worried, almost desperate. Renate, the rent's overdue. The landlord says if we don't pay this week, we'll be kicked out. You forgot to send the transfer. Her voice shook slightly, as if the world were ending. I stayed quiet for a few seconds, thinking of all the times I had rushed to the bank to make that transfer, the times I'd canceled my own plans to ensure they had a roof over their heads, the meals I'd skipped so they could live comfortably. And now, after excluding me from their wedding, she called me as though nothing had happened. Lena, I said calmly, surprising even myself. Didn't I tell you I only help special people? The silence that followed was so deep I could hear my heartbeat. For the first time in years, it wasn't me trembling. It was her. Renate, I don't understand, she stammered. We were always special to you. You're like a second mom to me. Lies. The same sweet tone she used every time she wanted something. The same one she had used to ask for money for her wedding dress, the honeymoon, the rings, all of which I had helped pay for, unaware I would never even see the ceremony. For years, I had felt like I was walking on eggshells, measuring every word and gesture, hoping for a small sign of affection from my own son. I had been the perfect mother, the patient provider, the quiet supporter, never complaining when they made me feel invisible. But those words, only special people, woke something in me that had long been asleep. I started mentally adding up the money I had spent on them over those 3 years. Between rent, food, gifts, emergencies, and indulgences, it totaled more than $20,000, money taken from my retirement, from my savings, from what my late husband had left for my peace of mind. And what had it all been for? To be treated like a stranger on my own son's wedding day. That night, I sat on my bed and cried, not from sadness, but from anger and years of quiet frustration. I cried for all the times they made me feel that my love was a burden, my presence unnecessary, my money the only thing of value. I cried for the naive mother I had been, for the woman who had lost herself trying to be essential to those who saw her as expendable. The next morning, something in me had changed. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal, it was something deeper, colder. When I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, I saw the same tired eyes, the same wrinkles that told stories of love given without return. But there was something new in my reflection, a firmness I hadn't seen in years, a quiet resolve. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, as I had done every morning for 40 years. But this time, I didn't think of calling Max to ask how he had slept, nor did I check my phone for an apology that would never come. For the first time in a long while, I thought about myself first. I sat at the table where I had once planned surprises for them, counted bills for their expenses, and quietly cried over their indifference. But this time, that same table would witness something entirely different. I took out my checkbook, my bank statements, and began to calculate. I needed to see in numbers the full extent of my own foolishness. Monthly rent of $500 for 36 months, $18,000. Food and household supplies, about $200 a month, another $7,200. Birthday, Christmas and anniversary gifts, around $3,000. Lena's medical expenses, $800. The unpaid car loan, $2,500. The air conditioner repair in their apartment, $600. The furniture for their living room, $400. That was the total cost of my generosity. $400 spent from my late husband's inheritance, my pension, and the savings I had carefully built over decades of work. All that money wasted to support 2 adults who couldn't even show basic respect. The phone rang. Max's name appeared on the screen. Usually my heart would race, hoping he'd finally call to apologize or say it was all a misunderstanding. But this time I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then silence. I took another sip of coffee as if nothing had happened. 10 minutes later, it rang again. Lena this time. I ignored it too. Moments later, a text from Max appeared. Mom, please answer. We need to talk. I deleted it without hesitation. At 2 in the afternoon, I decided to go for a walk, something I hadn't done in months without a reason tied to them. Usually, I went to the bank to make their transfers, the store to buy what they needed, or the pharmacy for Lena's medicine. But today, I walked just because I wanted to. I passed the park where I used to take Max as a child. I remembered that sweet boy who once hugged me tight and said I was the best mom in the world. When had he become this man who saw me only as a walking bank account? When did I start confusing love with money? When did I convince myself I had to buy my own son's affection? I stopped outside the bank where I had made countless transfers. Through the glass, the branch manager, Mr. Klein, noticed me and waved. He had processed every transaction, watching my balance shrink month after month to fund Max and Lena's lifestyle. I walked straight into his office. Mr. Klein, I said, I need to cancel all my automatic transfers. He looked surprised. For 3 years, those payments had been as consistent as sunrise. Are you sure, Mrs. Richter? Did something happen? His concern sounded genuine, more genuine than any care my son had shown in months. What happened is that I finally opened my eyes, I replied. Cancel everything. And please tell me how to protect my accounts. I don't want anyone else to have access to my money. While he processed the request, my phone kept ringing. Max, then Lena, then Max again. It was as if they could sense that their steady income was about to vanish. I turned the phone off completely. "Mrs. Richter," Mr. Klein said, handing me the documents. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I've seen you be very generous with your family over the years. I just hope you're not being pressured into this decision." His words touched me more deeply than I expected. This man, who barely knew me beyond financial transactions, showed more concern for me than my own son ever had. "I'm not being pressured, Mr. Klein," I said softly. "I've just stopped pressuring myself." Leaving the bank, I felt strangely light, as if I had shed a weight I'd carried for years. For the first time in a long time, my money truly belonged to me. No more obligations to people who saw me as a source of funds, not as family. On the walk home, I thought of everything I'd given up for them. The trips I'd canceled, the friends I'd stopped seeing, the hobbies I'd abandoned because every dollar spent on myself was $1 less for their demands. When I reached my house, I noticed 3 cars parked outside, Max's, Lena's, and one I didn't recognize. Through the window, I saw movement inside. My stomach dropped. They had keys, of course. I had given them keys, trusting they'd care for me someday the way I had cared for them. I took a deep breath before opening the door. It was time for the first true test of my new resolve. Inside, I froze. Max sat on my sofa, head in his hands. Lena paced nervously, and an older man I didn't know was sorting through papers on my dining table, my personal papers. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice louder than I expected. They all looked at me like I was the intruder in my own home. Lena spoke first, her tone urgent and anxious. "Renate, thank God you're here. We need to talk. This is Mr. Fisher, a lawyer we consulted about your situation." "My situation?" I asked calmly. "What situation?" "I'm doing perfectly fine." Max finally raised his head, his expression a mix of guilt and panic. "Mom, we went to the bank. They said you canceled all the transfers and blocked our access. We don't understand why you'd do that." The stranger stepped forward, extending a hand. "Mrs. Richter, I'm Dr. Fisher, a family attorney. Your children are worried about your mental health and asked me to assess your condition." I ignored his hand and went straight to the table, collecting my documents from his reach. "These are my private papers. You have no right to touch them without my consent." "Mom," Max interrupted, using that condescending tone he'd perfected, "we're just worried. You cut us off financially with no explanation and stopped answering our calls. Maybe you need help." Lena approached, reaching for my hand with false sympathy. "Renate, sweetheart, we know this is hard. Maybe the loneliness is affecting you more than you realize. At your age, confusion can happen." The word confusion echoed in my head like an alarm. Now I understood. They hadn't come to help me. They wanted to declare me incompetent and seize control of my money. The same woman who told me I wasn't special enough for her wedding was now treating me like a senile old woman. "I'm not confused," I said firmly. "I'm clearer than I've been in years. And all of you are going to leave my house right now." "Mrs. Richter," the lawyer said in his calm, professional tone, "I understand this feels overwhelming, but your children have the right to intervene if they believe your decision-making ability is impaired. They've documented concerning behavior." "Concerning behavior?" I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You mean deciding that my money is mine? Choosing not to fund 2 adults who treat me like garbage?" Lena stood up, offended. "We've never treated you badly. You're family. Everything you have will belong to us one day anyway. We're just taking care of it early." There it was, the truth, unfiltered. To them, I was already dead, and they were just collecting their inheritance in advance. "Out," I said, pointing to the door. "All of you." "Get out of my house!" Max stood up, his face twisted with anger. "Mom, we can't just leave. We have responsibilities. The rent, the car payments, the credit card you co-signed. You can't just cut us off overnight." "I can't," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "Who says I can't? For years, I paid rent for a home that wasn't mine and filled a fridge in a house where I was never welcome. I had financed a life that clearly had no room for me in it. Mr. Fisher opened his briefcase, took out a folder, and placed it on the table. "Mrs. Richter," he said, "we've prepared some documents that could make this transition easier. It's a power of attorney, allowing Max and Lena to manage your finances temporarily, just until you feel better." I took the folder, didn't bother opening it, and tossed it straight into the trash. "The only transition happening here is yours, to the front door." Lena began to cry, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of frustration, of anger barely contained. "You can't do this to us, Renate. We were counting on you. We made plans depending on your support. We bought things. We took on payments because we trusted you'd help." "Obligations based on my money," I said calmly. "Not on my well-being, not on my happiness, not even on my presence, only my money. And now that I've decided my money should serve my own life, suddenly I'm a confused old woman who needs guardianship?" Max stepped forward, but I moved back. He was no longer the boy who once ran into my arms when he was scared. He was a 35-year-old man who saw his mother as an obstacle between himself and an easy life funded by someone else. "Mom, we made mistakes," he said, trying to sound remorseful. "The wedding, it was all a misunderstanding. Lena was nervous, I was under pressure. We can fix this if you just start being reasonable again." "Reasonable?" I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "Being reasonable means continuing to fund your lifestyle while you treat me like a stranger. It means pretending it didn't hurt to be left out of the most important day of my only son's life." Mr. Fisher began packing his papers with the efficiency of someone accustomed to rejection. "Mrs. Richter, this isn't over. Your family has legal options. If you're making irrational financial decisions due to mental health decline, a judge can assign guardianship." His words hit hard. This wasn't just manipulation. It was a genuine legal threat. They intended to have me declared incompetent to control my own money. "Mr. Fisher," I said, looking him squarely in the eyes, "I suggest you do your research before threatening a 71-year-old woman who has managed her finances flawlessly for 40 years. I raised my son alone after my husband's death, ran a household, worked with integrity, and until last week supported 2 fully capable adults." Lena stopped crying then, her expression cold, revealing her true self. "This isn't over, Renate. We have rights and lawyers, too." "Perfect," I replied. "Hire all the lawyers you want, with your own money. Mine is no longer available to fund your tantrums." The 3 of them walked toward the door with the wounded pride of people unaccustomed to being denied. Before leaving, Max turned one last time. "Mom, this will end badly for you. You'll end up alone, with no one to care for you when you really need it." "Max," I said quietly, my voice steady with both sadness and clarity, "I'm already alone. The difference now is, it's by my choice that afternoon. I decided to do something I had postponed for years. Open my old piano. It had been sitting in the corner of my living room, covered with a dusty beige cloth, silent since the day my husband died. I lifted the cover slowly, my fingers trembling not from weakness but from emotion. The ivory keys were slightly yellowed, yet they still held a quiet dignity, just like me. I sat down, took a deep breath, and let my fingers find their way to a familiar melody, Claire de Lune. The notes came hesitantly at first, like an old friend unsure if they were welcome, but soon the music flowed again, soft and trembling, filling every corner of my house with warmth. For the first time in years, my home didn't echo with the sounds of demands, arguments, or guilt. It resonated with peace. As I played, memories resurfaced. The evenings when my husband would sit beside me, humming along. The nights when little Max would fall asleep on the rug while I played lullabies. Those were the days when love was pure, when family meant presence, not profit. When the last note faded, I felt lighter, as if I had exhaled decades of emotional debt. I wasn't just reclaiming my finances, I was reclaiming myself. Later, Eleanor came by again, holding a plate of cookies. "You play beautifully," she said softly. "Thank you," I smiled. I had forgotten that part of me existed. "Then it's time you remember her every day," she replied. That night, I started making a list in my notebook titled My Life. Version 2. Take piano lessons again. Travel to Vienna, the city my husband and I always dreamed of visiting. Volunteer at the local library. Redecorate the guest room, not for Max and Lena, but for myself or real guests. Learn to live happily alone, not lonely. I looked at the list and smiled. It wasn't long, but it was mine. The next morning, as sunlight poured through my kitchen window, I brewed coffee and looked out at my garden, the same garden Max once told me was a waste of time and energy. Now, I saw it differently. It wasn't a waste. It was a symbol. Every seed I would plant from now on would be for me, not for those who only took without giving back. When I checked my phone, there were dozens of missed calls and voice messages, some angry, some pleading. I deleted them all without listening. Then I sent a single text to both Max and Lena. Do not contact me again unless it's to apologize, with sincerity, not strategy. I wish you well, but my life is finally my own. I put my phone down and stepped outside into the morning air. For the first time in decades, I wasn't a mother financing someone else's comfort. I was Renate Richter, an independent woman rediscovering who she had always been. And as the birds sang above the fresh garden soil, I whispered to myself, freedom has no price, but it's worth every penny I've lost. That afternoon, I called Diana to vent, not because I was panicking, but because I needed to hear the voice of someone who still saw me as a human being. Not a walking checkbook, she answered on the second ring. Renate, are you all right? You sound tense. I told her everything. The surprise visit from the social worker, the lies Max and Lena had spread, and how close I had come to being labeled incompetent in my own home. There was silence on the other end for a moment before Diana spoke. They're cornered, Renate. When manipulators lose control, they get desperate. This isn't about love or concern, it's about power. They've realized their golden tap has been shut off. Her words were comforting in their bluntness. She was right. For years, Max and Lena had mistaken my kindness for weakness. Now that I had taken back control, they didn't know how to survive without manipulating me. Do you want my advice? Diana continued. Stop reacting to them. Let your lawyer handle everything. The more you engage, the more ammunition you give them. Silence will frustrate them more than any confrontation. I know, I sighed. It's just hard. He's my son. I keep asking myself where I went wrong. Stop, she interrupted firmly. You didn't fail as a mother. He failed as a son. Her words hit me deep, sharp, but true. For years I had been carrying guilt that didn't belong to me. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the trees. The house was quiet, peaceful but not empty. The air no longer felt heavy with expectation or obligation. It was mine again. Eleanor came by just as the first stars appeared, holding a small casserole dish. You've had quite a week, she said with a soft smile. So I thought you could use something warm for dinner. I laughed. If this continues, I'll start believing the universe sent you to me on purpose. Maybe it did, she replied, setting the dish on the table. We older women have to look out for each other, especially when the world treats independence like a disease. We ate together, talking about small things, recipes, flowers, books. For the first time in years, I enjoyed a meal without guilt or tension hanging over me. When she left, I stood at the doorway watching her cross back to her house. Then I looked at the blinking light of the security camera above my door. It wasn't a symbol of fear anymore. It was a symbol of protection, of boundaries. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, they tried to make me doubt myself. They tried to make the world doubt me, but truth doesn't need permission to exist. I closed the notebook, placed it on my nightstand, and turned off the light. For the first time in months, I slept deeply, without nightmares, without guilt, and without waiting for a phone call that would ruin my peace. Renate nodded slowly, still trembling with disbelief. You mean I should do the very thing they accused me of refusing? Yes, Mr. Weber replied calmly. But this time on your terms. You'll choose the doctor, someone impartial and respected. If we can present a professional evaluation that confirms your full mental competence, their case collapses. For a long moment, Renate said nothing. The betrayal cut so deeply she could barely process it. Her own child, her flesh and blood, had fabricated lies, manipulated witnesses, and tried to weaponize the law against her. And for what? For money. Finally, she whispered, "All right, Mr. Weber, let's do it. I want this to end, but I want it to end the right way." The next morning, Mr. Weber arranged an appointment with Dr. Hannah Klein, a respected psychiatrist known for her integrity and experience in elder law cases. Renate was nervous as she entered the bright, neatly organized office. Dr. Klein greeted her with a warm smile. "Mrs. Richter, please sit down. I've read the background information, but I prefer to hear things in your own words. Tell me what's been happening." Renate told her everything, calmly, clearly, and without bitterness. The story was long, but she spoke with a dignity that impressed the doctor. She didn't cry, she didn't dramatize. She simply told the truth. When she finished, Dr. Klein said softly, "Mrs. Richter, I can already tell that you are lucid, logical, and emotionally stable. But I'll run through some standard assessments to document everything formally. It's important we leave no room for doubt." The evaluation took nearly 2 hours. Memory tests, reasoning exercises, emotional assessment, and cognitive checks. At the end, Dr. Klein smiled. "Mrs. Richter," she said, "you are sharper and more self-aware than most people 20 years younger. I'll prepare a full report certifying your mental fitness, and I'll be willing to testify in court if necessary." Renate's eyes filled with relief. "Thank you, doctor. You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," Dr. Klein replied gently. "Your family tried to take your freedom. Let's make sure they never can again." That evening, Renate invited Eleanor over for tea. She told her everything about the false witnesses, the lawsuit, and the evaluation. Eleanor's eyes blazed with anger. "They're despicable. But you, my dear, are not alone. We'll all be there in court. Me, Maria, Carmen, and Elfrida. They'll see that you have a family now, just not the one they expected." Renate smiled faintly. "Thank you, Eleanor. I used to think blood defined family. Now I know. Love does." 2 weeks later, the day of the court hearing arrived. Renate wore a navy blue suit, her hair neatly tied, her expression calm but resolute. The courtroom was small but packed. Max and Lena sat across the aisle whispering to each other. They avoided her eyes. When the judge entered, the tension in the room thickened. Mr. Weber began the defense by presenting Dr. Klein's report. She testified with confidence, confirming Renate's full cognitive health and emotional stability. Then came the cross-examination. Max's lawyer tried to undermine her credibility, but Dr. Klein didn't flinch. "I have no personal stake in this matter," she said firmly. "My findings are clinical. Mrs. Richter is perfectly capable of managing her own affairs." Next, Mr. Weber presented Mr. Green's new affidavit, exposing how Lena had deceived him into signing a misleading document. Then, he introduced evidence from the security cameras, videos showing Max and Lena entering Renate's house uninvited, yelling and threatening her. The courtroom murmured. The narrative had turned completely. When it was Max's turn to speak, he stammered through rehearsed lines about concern and maternal care, but his anger betrayed him. When Lena took the stand, she tried to appear composed, but under questioning, she contradicted herself repeatedly. By the end, their case was in shambles. The judge leaned forward, her expression stern. "Mr. and Mrs. Richter," she said to Max and Lena, "this court finds no evidence of mental incompetence. On the contrary, Mrs. Richter demonstrates sound judgment and self-awareness. What I do see is an attempt to manipulate legal processes for financial gain." Max's face turned pale. Lena looked down, her jaw tight. The judge continued, "This case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office to investigate potential perjury and fraudulent filings." Renate closed her eyes, exhaling a long, trembling breath. It was over. Eleanor reached over and squeezed her hand. "You did it," she whispered. Renate smiled faintly. "No," she said softly. "I just stopped letting them do it to me." Lena's lips trembled, but she didn't speak. The courtroom was silent except for the faint scratch of the judge's pen as he took notes. Mr. Weber didn't press further. He didn't need to. The damage was done. Next, Max took the stand. Unlike Lena, he didn't pretend to cry. He wore an expression of forced calm, the kind that barely concealed anger. "Your Honor," he began, "I love my mother. But she's not the same person anymore. She's impulsive, mistrustful, and—" Mr. Weber interrupted. "Impulsive, Mr. Richter? You mean she stopped giving you money?" Max's jaw tightened. "That's not what I said." "Really? Let's review some facts." Mr. Weber lifted a folder from his briefcase. "Is it true that in the past 3 years your mother transferred a total of $33,400 to you and your wife?" Max hesitated. "Yes, but that was voluntary." "And is it true that after she decided to stop those transfers, you and your wife filed this lawsuit claiming she was mentally unfit?" Max shifted in his chair. "We were concerned for her well-being." Mr. Weber raised an eyebrow. "Her well-being or your income?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Miller raised a hand for silence, but even he couldn't hide the faint disapproval in his eyes. When the time came for Renate's defense, Mr. Weber called Dr. Moore. She testified with quiet authority. "I conducted a full mental capacity evaluation on Mrs. Richter. Her cognitive function, memory, and judgment are all well above average for her age. There is absolutely no clinical basis for declaring her incompetent." "And did she seem paranoid or delusional to you?" "On the contrary," Dr. Moore said firmly. "Her concerns about financial manipulation were logical, supported by evidence, and entirely reasonable." Then came the testimonies of Eleanor, Maria, Carmen, and Alfreda. One by one, they described how Renate had rebuilt her life with independence and purpose. Their warmth and sincerity filled the courtroom with something that even Max and Lena's lawyer couldn't fabricate: truth. When Eleanor spoke, her voice carried both strength and compassion. "I've seen women in decline," she said. "Renate is not one of them. She's alert, thoughtful, and courageous. What she's guilty of, if anything, is finally standing up for herself." When Mr. Weber finished presenting the defense, the courtroom fell silent again. Then Judge Miller leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "I've heard enough," he said. "The evidence is clear.